When describing a game to another person or in a blurb, the gameplay and some other bits like art style are described. But I want to probe that first bit a little more. Gameplay can be broken down into three distinctly different things to do that then expand into more recognizable mechanics. This would be considered a core loop, and within a game, there are two more loops that run alongside it, the meta and compulsion loop. The meta loop being what ties together different elements of a game, and particularly the core gameplay, and the compulsion loop being what happens throughout the game to keep you playing. This loop is the trickiest for me as a designer, and also just in general, since it's sort of the golden goose to get someone to continue playing your game. I've recently been replaying some Castlevania games, so I'll just put Castlevania Portrait of Ruin under the scope, though I will mention other games to dig a little deeper into the topic. For a Metroidvania, I would say the core is platforming, combat, and collecting. As I discuss the loops of a game, things can overlap, and you can start to see how it all comes together. We can somewhat agree on the first two. The third maybe sounds a bit weird. I would say collecting is a core part of the game as you collect some kind of resource, money, experience, etc. And you also just find items around the map, and specifically key items that you need to progress the story. And you get them, you get to them, by fighting and platforming. These key items can range from literal keys to platforming abilities needed to progress. And so you can see how these things start to feed into each other. For a Portrait of Ruin specifically, this can be seen in the background, where all three of them kind of happen in sequence. I jump to reach an enemy and attack them. They die, and sometimes I get money or an item, but often I'm getting experience in my character, and if I happen to use a sub-weapon, like the knife or a dart, I get skill points. I'd have to wager one of the cores on the design floor was switching between protagonists, but they clearly had a favorite in Jonathan for this game. Again, collecting is a bit of a weird one, but generally speaking, that third slot is occupied by a unique mechanic to the specific Metroidvania. And for this video, really, it's hard to make a blanket analysis, but generally speaking, 2 out of 3 are correct, and then a third one is usually very specific to the game, or rather your game that you're working on. Something like a shooter game can have a different kind of loop, where the 3 core things you do happen at the same time. Aiming, moving, and shooting don't happen in a sequence, but all at once. Be it a hero shooter, tactical shooter, or a single player experience, you don't stop to do one at a time, so likely you're doing 2 of these things at the same time. So you stop moving to aim and shoot, or you're moving and aiming, then shooting, running and shooting. You get the idea. So instead of being a loop, it's just a few nodes that happen in different sequences. But what about specific mechanics? I mentioned sub-weapons just a bit ago, but where would those fall into? It would be under combat. It's a way to damage enemies that sometimes requires you to platform to hit an enemy and can be collected from enemies and found. And just like sub-weapons, other forms of movement like double jumping, super jumping, and in Portrait of Ruin's case, turning into a frog or a bird, fall under platforming, allowing the player to access high up areas and smaller paths. These areas are part of getting to the end of the game, so going around and collecting and finding things is important to do. In short, the core loop of a game should be a rather tight and circular sequence of actions that build up as someone plays the game. When playing a game, especially one with some RPG elements to it, you pause from core gameplay to manage your characters. This could include switching up equipment and skills, buying said equipment. These are usually what's found in the meta loop, the downtime between core gameplay that's used to make yourself stronger. Notably, spending money is a core part of the meta loop because money spending is considered between the core and compulsion loop. So you're collecting money while you play the game as a reward, and because it makes you stronger in some kind of way. And in playing well, or playing in general, you get money. But interestingly, there is an overlap between exploration in the meta loop as Metroidvania stand out by not always having a fully explorable area, only for you to come back with a new ability to access the rest. The core gameplay, and rather the core loop, as a whole fits into the gap between those sections by getting you those unlockable abilities. And the promise of rewards and progression is what draws you back to those areas. For Portrait specifically, there are smaller maps called paintings to enter, and these have all the core gameplay elements that we've just talked about, so you have to go to them. And some of them also do hold those key items, so it all feeds neatly together. In other games, a slot in the meta loop is filled by a level select or matchmaking, and if you like, selecting a hero is part of the meta loop, as on a team-wide scale you're managing an entire team. And on a smaller scale, this could be a loadout for that specific character if applicable. So this loop is what strings together the core gameplay between menus and strings along the player in a literal sense throughout the game's systems. On to the hardest part of a game in my eyes. Over the years I've heard, and we've been sold, cool game concepts, but they tend to fall pretty flat. That's likely due to a limitation, and fundamentally, issues with the actual loops of the game, including a reason to continue playing a game. There are two kinds of components that would be found on a compulsion loop: extrinsic and intrinsic motivators. Extrinsic being quantifiable rewards, intrinsic being more nebulous and subjective. Some examples for an extrinsic motivator are doing more damage, completing collections of items, and competing on a leaderboard with a numeric score or placement. For intrinsic motivators, progressing the story, co-op with friends, and cosmetic customization and collection. Something between both is difficulty and mastery. Some people chase the challenge, some people avoid it, and some people only play enough to finish the game without needing to learn these crazy combos like DMC players need to, or people who just really like Souls-like games and they're challenged. Extrinsic motivators are often designed around more, because as a designer you can control that, and it's more stable than depending on your narrative and your players having friends or caring about cosmetics. The reason being is it's psychologically effective. You want to get the little tiny increase in a number like damage, 100% a game, and even if you just wanted that new ability. High scores are one of the longest standing motivators. If you just pump more coins in, you can keep trying to beat that score labeled on the machine. And with extrinsic motivators, this is where the Skinner box design comes from, where doing those little tiny tasks and tiny quests keep stringing you along to get little bits of gold and tiny equipment upgrades. Gacha games target this as well with daily logins and limited events. I've already mentioned the value of your time, but this also is for keeping players in the loop, and the rewards, interestingly, are only the chance to get a limited character, and not a limited character. So this is where compulsion can be used quite maliciously, and that's how the profits are driven up, because all that free reward that you get really isn't enough. So you're pushed to go buy a little more gambling money, if you will. Back to the game. For Castlevania, exploring the map is one of the biggest motivators, as it feeds back into what we've discussed. You fight, platform, and collect more as you uncover the map. Upgrades are another thing that motivate you, making you come back to areas so you can completely finish them off. And you have a degree of completion because there's a percentage of the map that you've seen as you explore. And there are a few side quests to do to collect a few items. They tend to take a backseat for the game. You don't have to do it, but you totally can, and it will give you the same thing where you are platforming and fighting certain enemies, collecting certain items, and then collecting your reward that should make you stronger. So these are the core of a game's experience, running through it, every little bit of it, and making it not only fun to play, but something you'd want to continue playing. After this video, I'm sure it'll be easier to notice when playing or even thinking about a game, making it easier to understand why you like or dislike a game from a fundamental standpoint, and you'll start to notice that there are levels to this, when it comes to certain games where there are exceptions and just designs as a whole. I can't cover everything. Clearly I haven't, and I could be totally wrong. There's something to argue about each of the core loops that I've presented today. But this is just an outline to get you started.